A 10-year-old boy, blind and black, steps onto the stage of New York's elite music academy, his small hands clutching a battered music case as the judge's sneer cuts through the air. The audience's laughter stings, but Jaden Brooks's fingers hover over the piano keys, ready to silence them all. The auditorium of the Manhattan Conservatory was a cathedral of sound, its high ceilings and polished wood panels amplifying every whisper, every chuckle. Jaden Brooks stood center stage, his sneakers scuffing the gleaming floor, his white cane tucked under one arm, the other clutching a worn leather music case, its edges frayed from years of use. At 10, he was small for his age, his frame swallowed by a second-hand blazer 2 sizes too big. The lights were bright, though he couldn't see them. He felt their heat on his face, sensed the weight of 100 eyes. The audience, wealthy patrons, music professors, students in crisp uniforms, murmured, their voices a low hum of curiosity and skepticism. At the judges' table sat Professor Edmund Langley, a towering figure in the classical music world, his silver hair slicked back, his European credentials impeccable. He leaned forward, one eyebrow arched as he took in Jaden's appearance. The faded blazer, the scuffed case, the dark skin that stood out starkly against the sea of pale faces in the room. "What's this?" Langley said, his voice dripping with amusement. "You here to play rap on our Steinway?" The audience erupted in laughter, sharp and cutting, the sound ricocheting off the walls. Jaden's shoulders stiffened, but his face remained still, his unseeing eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room. His mother, Mara Brooks, stood backstage, her hands clenched into fists. She was a shadow in the wings, her janitor's uniform still dusted with lint from the academy's floors she'd scrubbed that morning. Her heart pounded, not just for Jaden, but for herself, for the memories this place stirred, memories of her own dreams crushed under the weight of men like Langley. She wanted to scream, to storm the stage, but she stayed silent, her faith in her son stronger than her rage. "Name and peace," Langley said, his tone bored, already flipping through his notes as if Jaden were a formality to dismiss. "Jaden Brooks," the boy said, his voice clear, steady, cutting through the lingering chuckles. "I'll be playing my arrangement of Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1, with variations." Langley's pen froze. The audience's murmurs died. A 10-year-old arranging Tchaikovsky? Langley's lips curled into a smirk. "Your arrangement? Bold choice for a beginner." The word was a blade slicing through the air. More laughter followed, softer this time, but no less cruel. Jaden's fingers twitched, itching for the keys, but he waited, letting the silence grow heavy. Mara's nails dug into her palms. She knew this moment, knew the sting of being underestimated, of being mocked for daring to exist in a space not built for you. She'd been a prodigy once too, her fingers dancing across these same keys, her dreams of Juilliard within reach. Until Langley, then a young professor, had dismissed her audition, his words eerily similar. "You're not for classical music, dear. Stick to something simpler." She'd been 18, pregnant with Jaden, and that rejection had sent her spiraling into a life of cleaning floors to survive. Now her son stood where she had, facing the same man, the same prejudice. Jaden stepped toward the piano, his cane tapping lightly, guiding him to the bench. He sat, his small hands hovering over the keys, feeling the cool ivory under his fingertips. The room was still, the audience waiting for him to falter, to prove their assumptions right. Langley leaned back, arms crossed, his smirk unwavering. "Go on then," he said. "Impress us." Jaden's fingers pressed down, and a single note rang out, clear, resonant, a spark in the silence. It wasn't Tchaikovsky, not yet. It was something else, a low, jazzy hum, a pulse that seemed to vibrate through the floor. The audience shifted, confused. Langley's smirk faltered. Then Jaden's hands moved, and the world changed. His arrangement of Tchaikovsky's concerto burst forth, the familiar melody woven with jazz syncopations, bluesy undertones, a living, breathing thing that filled the auditorium with color. His small body swayed, his head tilted back, lost in the music. The notes were precise yet wild, classical discipline meeting raw, untamed soul. The audience was silent now, their laughter replaced by gasps. Mara's eyes filled with tears, her breath catching as she watched her son transform the room. Langley's face was unreadable, his pen forgotten on the table. Jaden's fingers danced, each note a defiance, each chord a declaration. "I belong here." The music built, crested, then softened. a conversation between past and present, between the boy on stage and the mother in the shadows. When the final note faded, the silence was deafening. Then, slowly, a single pair of hands began to clap. Mara's, fierce and proud. Others joined, hesitant at first, then thunderous, the sound swelling until the auditorium shook. Jaden stood, his face calm, his cane back in hand. He didn't bow, didn't smile. He'd said what he needed to say. Langley cleared his throat, his voice tight. "Interesting," he said, the word clipped, "but this is a classical audition. We don't do experiments." The audience stirred, some nodding, others frowning. Jaden's expression didn't change, but Mara's heart sank. She knew that tone, that dismissal. It was history repeating itself. Backstage, as Jaden joined her, Mara knelt, pulling him into a hug. "You were perfect," she whispered, her voice thick. Jaden nodded, his small hand gripping hers. "They don't get it," he said softly. "But they will." Jaden Brooks sat cross-legged on the floor of their cramped Bronx apartment, his fingers tracing the keys of a battered keyboard, its sound tinny compared to the Steinway at the conservatory. The audition was 2 days ago, and the rejection letter had arrived that morning, curt and final. "Your performance, while creative, does not meet the standards of the Manhattan Conservatory." Mara had read it aloud, her voice steady, but Jaden felt the tremble in her hands as she folded the paper. He didn't need to see her face to know she was fighting tears, not for him, but for herself, for the dreams she'd buried long ago. The apartment smelled of bleach and old coffee, the walls thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV blaring. Mara was at the kitchen table, scrubbing at a stain on her uniform, her movements sharp, angry. Jaden's keyboard sat on a makeshift stand of milk crates, the only instrument they could afford after the pawnshop claimed her old piano. He played softly now, not Tchaikovsky but his own composition, a melody that wove together the sorrow of the audition and the fire still burning in his chest. Each note was a question. "Why do they push us away? Why don't they listen?" Mara's voice broke the silence. "You don't need them, Jaden. You're bigger than their stage." But her words were hollow, weighed down by years of scrubbing floors, of auditions that ended in laughter or silence. She'd taught him everything. How to read Braille music, how to feel the rhythm in his bones, how to blend the classical she'd loved with the jazz that pulsed through their neighborhood. She'd been his first teacher, his only teacher, pouring her broken dreams into him. Jaden stopped playing, his hands resting on the keys. "They laughed, Ma, before I even played. Why?" His voice was small but steady, the question cutting deeper than he meant. Mara's hands stilled. She crossed the room, kneeling beside him, her calloused fingers brushing his cheek. "Because they're scared," she said. "Scared of what you can do, scared of what you mean." He tilted his head, his unseeing eyes searching her voice. "What do I mean?" She hesitated, then said, "You're proof they're wrong. About us, about me." Jaden didn't fully understand, but he felt the weight of her words, the pain behind them. He knew their story, how she'd been a prodigy, how she'd almost made it, how one man's words had stolen her future. He didn't know the man's name, not yet, but he knew the story lived in her silences, in the way she lingered over certain pieces, her fingers ghosting over keys she no longer played. The next day, Jaden insisted on returning to the conservatory. "I want to try again," he said, his jaw set. Mara protested, but his determination was a mirror of her own, and she relented. They took the subway, Jaden's cane tapping the platform, Mara's hand warm on his shoulder. The conservatory's halls were quieter now, no audition crowd, just students practicing scales, their notes floating through the air. Jaden felt the space differently today, its grandeur less intimidating, its weight more like a challenge. They found a practice room, a small space with a grand piano. Mara hesitated at the door. "We're not supposed to be here," she whispered, but Jaden was already moving, his cane guiding him to the bench. He sat, his fingers finding the keys, and began to play. This time, it was his own piece, not Tchaikovsky, a melody that started soft, mournful, then built into something fierce, defiant. It was jazz and classical, and something entirely his, a story of rejection and resilience woven into every note. Unbeknownst to them, a small crowd gathered outside the door. Students, professors, even a janitor paused, drawn by the sound. Mara stood frozen, her heart pounding as the music swelled, Jaden's small body swaying, his face alight with focus. The notes were a rebellion, a refusal to be silenced. When he finished, the silence was heavy, then broken by applause, not mocking this time, but genuine, hesitant, growing louder. A voice cut through the clapping. "Who authorized this?" It was Langley, his footsteps sharp as he approached. Mara stiffened, her hand tightening on Jaden's shoulder. Langley's face was a mask of irritation, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Jaden. "You again?" "This isn't a playground, boy." Jaden stood, his cane in hand, his voice calm. "I'm not playing games, sir. I'm playing music." Langley's lip curled. "Music? That's not what we teach here. You don't belong." "Enough." Mara's voice was low, but it carried a fire Jaden had never heard. She stepped forward, her janitor's uniform stark against Langley's tailored suit. "You don't get to decide that. Not again." Langley's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Mara? Brooks?" His voice faltered, and Jaden felt the shift, the sudden tension in the air. Mara didn't answer, but her silence was louder than words. The crowd murmured, sensing the undercurrent. A young professor, a woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. "Let him play again," she said, "properly, on the main stage." Langley started to protest, but the crowd's murmurs grew, their support for Jaden palpable. Mara's hand trembled on Jaden's shoulder, but she nodded. That evening, the conservatory's main auditorium was half full, students, faculty, a few curious patrons. Jaden stood on stage again, the same battered music case at his feet. Langley sat in the judge's seat, his face unreadable, but Mara was in the front row now, not hidden backstage. Jaden's fingers touched the keys, and he played. Not his Tchaikovsky arrangement, but his own composition, the one he'd played in the practice room. It was raw, powerful, a story of pain and triumph, of a boy who saw the world through sound, of a mother who'd never stopped believing. The audience was silent, then erupted, standing, clapping, some crying. Langley sat still, his hands clenched, his past staring him in the face. Jaden didn't bow, didn't smile. He stepped off the stage, his cane tapping, and took his mother's hand. The auditorium lights dimmed, but the air buzzed with energy as Jaden and Mara stood in the wings, the crowd's applause still echoing. Langley approached, his face pale, his usual arrogance gone. "Mara," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "I didn't know about you, about him." Mara's eyes were steel. "You knew enough," she said. 20 years ago you told me I didn't belong. You took my scholarship, my chance. And now you tried to do the same to my son." Jaden's head tilted, piecing it together. Langley was the man from her stories, the one who'd crushed her dreams. He felt her trembling beside him, not from fear, but from years of buried anger. Langley's shoulders sagged. "I was young, ambitious. I didn't think—" "You didn't care," Mara cut in. "But Jaden's not me. He's better, and he's here." The young professor from earlier joined them, her name tag reading, Dr. Ellis. "I've spoken to the board," she said. "Jaden's performance was extraordinary. We're offering him a full scholarship, effective immediately." Mara's breath caught, her hand squeezing Jaden's. He felt her joy, her pride, but he also felt the weight of her past, the scars Langley had left. He stepped forward, his voice clear. "I'll take it," he said, "but only if my mom can play here too. She taught me everything." "Doctor." Ellis smiled, nodding. "We'd be honored." Langley said nothing, his eyes on the floor. The crowd was dispersing, but some stayed, whispering about Jaden, about the boy who'd turned their world upside down with one note. Mara knelt, hugging Jaden tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You showed them." Jaden hugged her back, his small face fierce. "We showed them, Ma." As they left the conservatory, the night air cool against their skin, Jaden heard the city. Car horns, distant jazz, the pulse of life. He didn't need to see it to know he belonged. His music, his mother's music, had carved a space for them both. And as they walked, Mara hummed softly, a melody Jaden knew by heart, a promise that their story was just beginning.